all my
Okay, are we live? Yeehaw. And check out the displays and buy lots of books from Apogee to make sure we get them back here again. And come to the auction. Come to the auction and support Jim Busby. Um, anyway, we're a fairly radical organization, actually less and less so over time as society or parts of our space culture at least move in the direction we're already at. But I do want to say that we have always in the foundation acknowledged the real heroes, the giants upon whose shoulders we stand. We heard something great by Howard about being inspired by those books, which I have actually, and they're very cool books. But I remember one of the great inspirations in my life. And I was a kid in England, and it was in the middle of the Vietnam War, and we were taking a lot of flack. I was an Air Force kid, and then the story of the Apollo program was underway, and we're called into the room, and I think it was a pretty ungodly hour, but we're starting to see these shots and such of the lunar landing. It changed my life, literally changed my life. And so it is an incredible honor for us, especially given that this is the anniversary of the first landing on the moon, for one of our heroes, and one of the first people, I want to say, who crossed over, I don't know whether into the light side or the dark side, but one of the first NASA astronauts, there were two actually, who actually began to engage with what became or is the new space community. Pete Conrad and Buzz Aldrin were two of the first people to really understand what next generation was going to be about and to begin to engage with us. Now, we don't all agree. Hell, as you heard, we don't all agree internally with the way things go or the way things should go. But to have somebody of this stature, this understanding, this genius, this engineering capability, and this vision to even engage, to have a dialogue with us, to agree to come to our meeting, to associate, to even argue with now and then, is incredibly important, because it shows that somebody, one of our heroes, actually takes what we're doing seriously, and we take what he's doing seriously. And with a partnership like this, then we can really start to change the future. So I am absolutely honored. I'm blown away by the fact he was able on a day like this to take the time to come here. And without further ado, because I really don't have to explain this gentleman, Mr. Buzz Aldrin.
We're going to go into the past so that we know how to go into the future by understanding the present. I guess that sounds prophetic, Jesus. Anyway, where did all of this start for me? Well, I have to acknowledge parents. My father was an early aviation pioneer. He started out young. He graduated from high school in short pants at age 15, went to Clark University, studied under, his physics professor was Robert Goddard. Timing is everything. And he learned to fly after going to Worcester Polytech and started MIT, but World War I came along. He bootstrapped his way into flying, and one of his first assignments at the end of the war was in the Philippines. He was an aide to General Billy Mitchell. He ran into the two daughters of an Army chaplain over there in the Philippines, and he married the older one. Her name was Marion Moon. Now, all you guys know that. laughing. I had my first airplane ride at age 2 in a Lockheed Vega that was painted to look like an eagle. And eagles are very important to me. We chose the name for the lunar landing, and of course it's the symbol of our country. But my father, before that, in the early 20s, he had gone to MIT and got his doctor's degree and was a commandant of the Air Corps Engineering School at Wright Field. So, McCook Field then. So he knew all the people who eventually became general officers during World War II. They went through his school there in Dayton, Ohio. So I had this sort of heritage. He was with the Standard Oil of New Jersey Oil Company. That's why he was flying a Lockheed Vega painted like an eagle. He had flown that over the Alps in 1929, and I was conceived in Paris during that trip, born in 1930. So I grew up not in the Depression, really, because my father had sold some incentive stock in, I think it was early October 1929, just before the stock market went down. Timing is everything. It was a great youth. I went to summer camp. A number of things are outlined in a children's book that I'll flash at you in a little bit. During World War II, my father was assigned in the Pacific, and about that time I had 2 older sisters who were doing much better than I was in school, but it was pointed out to me as I was in 9th grade that this is going to count. So I changed my dedication. Still kept it going in sports. I was a little short, but I was a pole vaulter, and I ended up 165-pound center in an undefeated, untied state champ football team. A little too small to be a ball player at West Point. There are a couple stories about why I went to West Point rather than Annapolis. But there was no Air Force Academy at the time. I graduated in 1951, third in the class, and went in the Air Force, and the Korean War was still going on. I went through pilot training, flew F-86s here at Nellis before going over to Korea. Last 6 months of the Korean War, shot down a couple of MiGs. Timing again was everything. Well, there are a couple of interesting stories north of the Yalu River that I'll share with somebody sometime. I came back here and instructed in gunnery for a while, and then went to the Air Force Academy as an aide to the Dean of Faculty. And he got transferred out because of a revolt in the faculty. And I got my choice assignments after being an instructor for the second lieutenants, who were the upperclassmen for the cadets, the Air Force Academy, the class of '59, who had come in 1955. So I had my choice of assignments to fly F-100s in Germany. When I arrived over there, I ran into a guy who was on the track team with me, Ed White. He was a hurdler and I was a pole vaulter, and we shared stories of Madison Square Garden. He said, Buzz, you really ought to get into this fighter squadron. He'd been there 2 years. So I got into a very spirited fighter squadron, and he was there for about the next year. Ed and I represented the squadron in NATO gunnery competition. He rotated back, went to Michigan for a master's degree, and said he's going to go to the test pilot school. Well, that sounded like a pretty good thing to me. So after we had transitioned over to nuclear weapon delivery as a 28, 29-year-old, that's pretty sobering thought to be on alert with a 5-minute siren, and you take off flying low level into Czechoslovakia, Poland, deliver your weapon, and then head for Switzerland or Sweden, because probably your base wasn't going to still be there. A lot of people don't understand that people were on those kind of alert statuses, and and B-52s. I opted to go to MIT, and while I was there, I extended the program for a doctor's degree, and then I said, now what does an Air Force officer need in the next 15 years with what I knew how to intercept airplanes, and MIT had computers and guidance. I didn't think the Air Force had any need to know how to land on the moon, and re-entry, when you're coming in, you're looking the wrong way. You can't see where you're going because there's too much flame and there's instruments. But the one thing that we didn't know anything about in 1960 and 1961 was intercepting spacecraft. So I decided to do a little research on rendezvous and understood that we didn't know too much about how to do that, really. So I applied my fighter pilot rules to that and came up with a system of eliminating the variables until you could kind of set it up for you and then do sort of a standard intercept. And I thought that was pretty smart and pretty creative. Now Ed writes me and he says he's going to try for the astronaut program in the second group in 1962. So I said, well, shoot, I can shoot gunnery as good as he can. So I applied too, but I hadn't had test pilot training, and he had. So he was accepted, and I wasn't. However, the next year they eliminated the requirement for test pilot training. By that time, I had finished my thesis, sorta, and was assigned to Los Angeles with the Space and Missiles Division in the Gemini target office. That was the closest the Air Force could come to rendezvous, to be the target for the NASA programs. We studied the Air Force involvement in the Gemini program, and the Air Force finally, a low, meager little experiments office in Houston. I got myself assigned to that while I was waiting selection for the astronaut program. That came through just about a month before Kennedy was shot, the guy who charted our course for the space program. I was selected just a month before he was killed. We had a lot of basic training in geology and field trips, survival training, and the guys were getting into the Gemini program, and I thought with all my experience I'd be kind of head of the list. Well, I wasn't head of the list. There were too many white scarf Navy carrier pilots who didn't think too highly of eggheads from MIT, who thought they knew it all. So it took a quirk of fate. Again, an accident in St. Louis changed the course of the Gemini program, and Jim Lovell and I, instead of backing up 10, backed up 9, which was flying with the astronaut maneuvering unit. That resulted in an EVA that wasn't very successful. And then he and I, Lovell and I, were assigned to the of Gemini 12, and we succeeded in understanding how to do spacewalks. The old scuba diver here welcomed the opportunity to train underwater, neutral buoyancy for spacewalking, and everything turned out really well on that mission. A couple of months later, Ed was killed in the Apollo fire. It set us back about a year. Grissom and Chaffee were killed along with Ed White, who's buried at West Point. Well, the Apollo program was kind of upon us, and I was assigned to the backup of the third Apollo mission with a lunar module. Things shifted around. There wasn't a lunar module. We became the second one without a landing, and that was Apollo 8, and it went to the moon. Neil and I were on the backup crew. I think it's about time to run the video now, and I'll finish my notes, but we'll remind you a little bit of some of the events of Apollo 11. Do you need some help? It's great music. My wife likes to have the music turned up. It's the planets. At least a good bit of it is.
We choose to go to the moon.
There are two places in
We
here where you're
choose to
allowed,
go to
and
the
if you
moon
don't,
in this
you're above
decade and
audience.
do the thing. Not because they are easy, but because...
I'd like to trace through a little bit for you. Developments that have taken place in the food department. In fact, on this flight, we've carried along pieces of bread. Along with the bread, we have a ham spread.
Retro.
Go. Fido. Go.
Guys,
Go.
Patrol. Go. Telcom.
Go.
GNC.
Go.
Ecom. Go. Surgeon.
Go.
Capcom, we're go for landing.
Eagle Houston, you're go for landing, over. Roger, understand, go for landing. 3,000 feet. Roger, 1201 alarm.
1201 alarm.
Same time, we're go, flight. We're
Okay,
go.
we're go.
Right, we're go. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. 30 feet, 2.5 down. Straight shadow. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. Roger, Tranquility. We copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue. We're breathing again. Now I want to back up and partially close the hatch. Making sure not to lock it on my way out. That's our home for the next couple hours. We want to take good care of it. Beautiful view. Magnificent desolation. Now we'll get to the details of what's around here, but it looks like a collection of just about every variety of shape, angularity, granularity, but every variety of rock you could find.
Because of what you have done, humans have become a part of man's world. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one.
Buzz, this is Houston. You have approximately 3 minutes until you must commence your EVA termination activity. Roger, understand.
Tranquility Base, Houston, you're cleared for takeoff.
Roger, understand. We're number 1 on the runway. We've come to the conclusion that this has been far more than 3 men on a voyage to the moon. More still than the efforts of a government and industry team. More even than the efforts of one nation. We feel that this stands as a symbol of the insatiable curiosity of all mankind to explore the unknown.
We set sail on this new sea because there is new knowledge to be gained and new rights to be won, and they must be won and used for the progress of all people. We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Well, it's going to happen again. Somebody's going to get there again. I hope we don't have to learn Chinese or Russian. So what happened after NASA? Well, I decided it was a good thing to try and complete this Air Force career that I started on. I felt the best way to do that after being away from the service for 11 years, 3.5 at MIT, 7.5 with NASA, would be to kind of break back in as Commandant of Cadets at the Air Force Academy. Well, that was not to be, because there was a classmate named Sandy Vandenberg who had a father who was a chief of the Air Force, and he was kind of number one on the runway for that particular assignment. So guess what? They assigned me to be Commandant of the Test Pilot School. Well, I had never been through formal test pilot training, but I really did the best that I could. I remember one of the instructors there, we'd made a trip overseas to visit the Empire Test Pilot School with the students in the class and the instructor. The Italian test school, where I paid a visit on Gina Lollobrigida, who was part of our around-the-world trip right after our mission, and a German test school and a French test school. Anyway, one of the instructors said to me, you know, when I went through here, I was, this is non-repeatable now. He said, Chuck Yeager was here, and he spoke to me twice. One time, we passed in the hall in the morning. I was going to get some coffee, and I said, good morning, sir. And he said, huh. Next time, he handed me a diploma, and I said, thank you, sir. And he didn't say too much then either. Well, I really did try and relate to those guys, but it was clear the Air Force didn't know exactly what to do with a dust kicker on the moon back in those days. So I decided to retire from the Air Force. I had begun to wonder what I was going to be doing, and to kind of cut to the quick, what happened now in an unstructured life, following a very structured life at MIT, at West Point, MIT, the Air Force, and NASA, was I'm in an unstructured life trying to be an author with somebody else, and my life dwindly fall apart in depression that I'd inherited. My grandfather, who was on my mother's side, had committed suicide as a chaplain. My mother committed suicide 1 year before my flight, and her brother had a couple of daughters who committed suicide. And alcohol and depression were involved in both of those, and they were now descending on me. Well, I don't want to go into all the story of how the timing again was right. I was in the right time. West LA is a place to recover if you have addictions, and I owe my life to many people there. It was a very critical time because I'm trying to transition and wonder what I'm going to do next in my career. Well, I knew things about space, so I just stayed with space. And after trying to sell cars at a Cadillac place, then I went to TRW and SAIC and began doing a few things that were constructive. I began thinking about a better way to get to the moon than John Hubolt's wonderful lunar orbit rendezvous. I just wonder if Kraft Ericke had something in mind. So I improved a little bit on what he was doing by having a spacecraft swing by the Earth and swing around the moon and then come back to the Earth and put in a parking orbit or two and repeat the thing. And I thought, man, that's brilliant. The only trouble is, you invest in something like that and you don't use it for very long, and it really isn't too suitable if your purpose is to put people from the surface of the Earth to the surface of the moon. So I put it on back burner. Tom Paine, who was the administrator in NASA, when we landed on the moon, was retired and living in West LA, writing his memoirs about submarine days. And this was about time he was picked to head up the National Committee on Space. And he said, some interesting guys are working on some repeating orbits to Mars. So I began applying the seat-of-the-pants approach to relative motion and rendezvous and came up with Mars cyclers. And that was featured in that study. But like any other idea that's NIH or not invented here, why the government didn't think that was all that clever, and neither did companies. But professor at Purdue and a bunch of graduate students are following through on that. And when I get through trying to work on the immediate problems, why I'll start spending a little bit more time on that kind of a strategy to get to Mars. About that time, I met Lois, and she's had a big impact on my life. I go to cocktail parties, stand around, no drinking, of course, but you know, it's not the favorite thing that I want to do, but I meet a lot of people, her contacts and her exuberance. She went by the initials the other day in Paris or Scotland of, this is a BOF. That's a ball of fire. Well, she's a ball of fire, all right, and and together we are putting together quite a fascinating life. About this time, I ran into an engineer from NASA. He turned out to have been the program manager on LEM 5. But we were at a propulsion conference in San Diego, and we began to compare notes, and we both agreed that solid rockets were not too good a thing to have on the shuttle. We'd already lost one of them. So we formed a little effort called Starcraft Boosters, where you put a rocket that's good inside of an airframe and then it, unmanned, of course, fly it back and land. And it's an idea whose time will come one of these days as a simple way to take advantage of having reusables, the same expendable one, and you can drop tanks and do wonderful things with a lot of standardization. I pursued and followed the PLS, Personnel Launch System studies, Boeing with the bike and Langley with an HL-20. At the time, I actually preferred the Biconic. It was innovative, and it had a feature where you could fold out wings after reentry and land on a runway if you designed it a certain way. As a group, we looked at the people who were saying NLS isn't working, ALS isn't working, Space Lifter, all these efforts of NASA were just not going anywhere. SLI, single stage to orbit, and people were saying, looks like we may have to fly the shuttle until 2020, 25. So we said, wait a minute, you got to have crew escape out of this thing. So we did a quick study for United Space Alliance, 4, 6, and 8 people to be ejected in a pod. 6 and 8 messed up the bulkhead in the cargo bay. NASA wasn't going to do that. 4 people you'd have to upgrade every 2 years as you went through overhaul on the orbiter, the 4-orbiter system. We didn't think they'd do that. Maybe but we really liked the 8-person crew module because it looked like an HL-20, and we were going to launch it in something we called Aquila, which was an external tank with modifications to have 3 RS-68s from the Delta IV rocket, 4 segment solids, and then a pod of the upper stage of the Atlas V with the RL-10. We took off in 2/3 thrust, so if you lost one of the RS-68s, you throttle the other up as long as it wasn't catastrophic, and you completed the mission. If you lost the RL-10 in the upper stage, you at least could get the crew module into orbit with its own RCS, and you weren't in the drink. Boeing's and Lockheed's OSP didn't do that, and ours had a lot of growth to it. I wouldn't be surprised but what we might rejuvenate that and toss that over the transom to NASA. We also, well, they finally canceled the OSP program, so that took care of our objection to their trying to advance it. We submitted a Space Vision Institute on the 1st of December, '03. We didn't know what NASA was doing with the White House studies. It was a very good study of what to do with some experts who could come and recommend what NASA ought to be doing. After the Wright brothers' anniversary, why the president came out with his vision for space exploration, not messing up the 100th anniversary of the Wright brothers, not messing up the State of the Union and making it political. And '04 was a political year. He didn't really talk about it, and he got a lot of flack because of that. But he did not want it to become political, and it really shouldn't become political. The Accident Board of Columbia said, separate crew and cargo. And the vested interest said, yeah, in launch vehicle, that's what you mean, isn't it? No, that is what they meant. But Boeing, of course, wanted a separate EELV to launch the crew. Lockheed wanted theirs to launch the crew. ATK wanted theirs to launch the crew. Heavy lift booster. We were not going to win that argument, but it may just win by default. But to me, there's no reason why you need two different launch vehicles to get the crew and the lander up there and join in Earth orbit, or join at L1 and proceed with the mission. We need a parallel path, and that's why I took my efforts and molded them into an alternate architecture, you might say, in COTS. I was hoping that we could entice Raytheon to get into the human spaceflight business. They chose to no bid on COTS, and so I started looking at Clippers or some way to internationalize, globalize, get ESA involved. Well, no, they want to go with a 4-person upgrade of Soyuz. God, somebody really wants to talk to me. Oh, I'm too late, huh? No. Anyway, we need an alternate path, not to replace NASA necessarily, and Rick, you know, rather than say the shuttle's no good, the station's no good, let's get rid of all of NASA. Why don't you let them at least play games, but stop flying the shuttle, stop supporting the station, but use what they got to at least try and come up with some kind of one launch vehicle to make it work. You're not going to make yourself very popular by just totally bad-mouthing something that's inevitable to be with us for quite a while. I think we just have to try and hope for the best, mold them, and then come up with this dual parallel path some way. And I really hope that that's going to have success as we journey into the future. And I'm placing my money on that happening. And as we proceed from suborbital flight, I wasn't really all that in favor of stunts like that, but it looks like it is going to attract a lot of support of people. And if we can transition easily from suborbital with minimum modifications of spacecraft and go into orbital and then marshal the loser of CEV to support some of these things, get international support, fundraiser, we just may end up with a real winner. And it's groups like this that come together to explore the eventualities, the things that could come up with success. And I am right now very optimistic about the future for commercial spaceflight. It's going to be slow, it's going to be hard. I wish I was as confident programs, but they're going to go through some reiteration, and hopefully they'll end up with something that we will be proud of. I wrote an article in Popular Mechanics on cycling orbits, December issue, and the children's book is now very popular. You see a lot of things that were in my youth. There's the airplane I had my first ride in, and it goes on from there. So I'm going to write one about 5 times this size, or that many episodes, Chinese gunpowder and firecrackers to Alpha Centauri, bringing in my wonderful science fiction story, Encounter with Tiber. So I haven't been doing very much in the last 37 years. Thanks a lot.
Buzz, thank you so much. You definitely honor all of us in coming here, and really thanks for your time. We're running a little late, but I know we all need a little bit of time to stretch our legs and find the little astronauts room. So we're going to take 15 minutes here, and then we'll get back on and we'll knock the rest of the program out.